Any questions from last week that need to be clarified, taken care of? You can actually go online and watch this. He tapes it each week. And he's preaching at his son's church this morning. And so he was here for 8:30 worship. Then he took off to go over and preach there. His boys in Florida having some fun with family. So that's pretty cool. So Eric's going over to preach for him. And that's got to be kind of neat as a dad to go preach in your boy's church when he's out of town. Yeah. You did that for your dad some? Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. That's very cool. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's true. I always tried to get people to preach that were better than I was, so that folks could see what's possible. And, yeah. Any other questions from last week? Hey, guys, welcome. Sit anywhere you wish. All right, well, let's have a prayer. We'll begin our time together. Thank you, Lord, for this day, for the blessing that you bring us. Bless Eric over where he's leading worship, and his boy as he's off getting a little time off. And bless our time together here. Help us to learn some things about you, God, about you, John, and about us as Methodists. In your holy name we pray. Amen. All right, this is week 5 of Basic Methodism, or Methodism 101. A couple things I want to remind you of that I don't think that it's important to remember exact dates, but I think if we can remember roundabout dates, that it becomes very important for us. John Wesley was born about 1700, and he died about 1800. Your dates are there. The Revolutionary War actually began in 1775 and ended in 1783. Now, we talk about the clergy abandoning the Anglican churches. But having studied this years ago, until I sat down and read it this week and went back over it, I didn't realize that they abandoned the churches until after the Civil War. I found that very interesting. And so John ordained Francis Asbury after the Civil War in 1784. Remember that John wasn't a bishop. He didn't have the right to do it. He said that he took on the authority of what was called spiritual episkopos, a spiritual bishop, when he ordained Asbury. Many people say that his thought was that this was just going to be a stopgap for a while until the Church of England re-engaged and began to send priests back over to all the Anglican churches so that it would refill them. And then John thought they'd fold out of the way, Methodism would fold out of the way. When we know history, that did not take place, and it began a growing of churches. Now, what Eric has shared with you over the past couple of weeks are the class meetings and all of these kind of things. You need to understand that those were extensive over in England, but they also were going on in America prior to Francis Asbury coming over as the bishop. The First Methodist Church was chartered in 84. So you can see the Revolutionary War, 83, 84, 84. We're the next year after Revolutionary War, the Methodist Church coming in earnest inside of the. What do we call ourselves at that point? Were we still the colonies, or have we changed over to the United States? Couldn't have been the United States because we didn't have states, did we? Your homework for this week, to go and learn some American history, because I don't know those exact dates. Okay. Hey guys, how y'all doing? Come on, you're fine. Thanks, buddy. Yes, sir.
I
I think they did too. I think that was a part of all that Congress and stuff that they got started. The interesting thing to me is this. The reason I bring this up is that the United Methodist Church is actually designed incredibly similarly to the United States of America, with the kind of representation and the equal number of clergy to laity in leadership. And it's just interesting because our two entities started at about the same time. So you may want to at some point take a look or read some about that. I find that really quite interesting. John Wesley's methods were well honed by the time he brought all that stuff to America. The classes and all those kind of groups and how you became. Now, I was talking with someone this morning that wanted to become a member of the church, and he said, what do I need to do? I said, have you been a member of a church anywhere else? And he said, no. Well, if they're a member of another church, then it's just a matter of transferring their membership over here. But if it's somebody who has never been a member of another church, then it's a completely different thing. And so I'm going to have to sit down with him and talk about all the implications and then go over the things. And then we'll bring him before the congregation and ask all those questions. If we were back in John's time, in order to become a member of the society, not that you would remember it, but it was multi-layered as to how deep you could get into it and how you made promises to do certain things. John would be appalled today where churches would simply walk up and say, come on down the aisle, raise your hand high, and then go back and have a seat. He would say, this is crazy. He said, this is not a part of being a part of the church. Part of being the church is being involved in the smaller groups and stuff that happen. John moved from a works-driven understanding of God to an experiential-driven understanding of God, to one which is both. See if I can explain that to you. The old Jewish way was that you worked your way into grace. In fact, what you did is you didn't make mistakes, and then you were perfect. John, when he first started out, his way of, even though he understood the grace aspect of church, of God, he still felt like he needed to do everything and keep grinding on that because he never felt that God loved him. After he had his heartwarming experience, the grace became a big part. And then why he did what he did was based on the grace that had been given to him. He continually felt that if we were in relationship with God, that we actually needed to be doing things for God, not to earn grace, but out of response to the grace that had been given. And his whole thought process further emboldened his love for God and his love for the ministry. His understanding of salvation had been broadened and his commitment had been deepened by the personal relationship that he felt with his heartwarming experience. He pressed this kind of thought process not only on himself, but also on the followers of his way. He said that we need to witness to the power and presence of the Spirit. If you remember anything that I say today, witness to the power and presence of the Spirit. That was big for him. All the stuff that he did was for that reason. Now, when you think of the word witness, what do you think of? Witness. Give me a second here. What's witness? Huh? Testifying. Yes. Anybody else? Witness. Yeah, I dropped some Greek stuff in there for you. The noun of it, of the word that's used. Martyr, witness, testify, evidence, testimony. To give testimony to proclaim, make a proclamation of, witness. Witnessing for John is a big thing, and that's what we're going to talk about this week is witness. Now, when Eric asked me to do this, the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear witness inside the church is what? Yeah, I'm thinking about religious stuff. I'm thinking about actually doing testimony and talking with people about Jesus and stuff. But Christian witness is to give testimony or proclamation to the hope and faith of Christ. How do we do that? What is it? One of the things that we talked about over the past few weeks in sermons is the Kerygmatic content, the Kerygma. Everyone say Kerygma. It's a weird word, but what it means is the life, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The Kerygma. The Kerygmatic content of the gospel is a part of something that we say every single week inside of our communion. Christ was, Christ is, Christ will. Christ was buried, Christ was risen, Christ will come again. That's the Kerygmatic content of the gospel. The Kerygma is the central theme to Christendom. It's the thing that draws us forward, the Kerygma. And the question becomes, what does the Kerygma mean to those of us that call ourselves believers? And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Witness to what end? Some years ago, anybody remember when people would walk up to you in the store and say, "Are you saved?" Back in the 70s? It drove me insane. I hated it. As though someone could ask me a question without any words around it, and I could understand what they were asking so I could give them an answer. And so back in those days, I was a bit of a smart aleck. And I would say, "Saved from what?" And they would look at you, and I go, "Saved from what?" And then, saved to what? Saved by what? Saved for what? By the time we got through all those, they're ready to walk on deck. Because all they wanted to do was just throw this thing at me, and then be on their way. But, I thought you wanted to talk. You were asking me a question, so I want to parse it down. And when they got to the end, if the answer was the same, I'd say, "Yeah, I'm saved." Sometimes they just turn and walk off. But it really irritated me that you walk up to somebody and say, "Are you saved?" Well, saved from what? Saved to what? Saved by what? Saved for what? Those are particularly United Methodist kind of thought processes. And the development of salvation, as I talked about inside the sermon this morning, that it's not a punctiliar thing. It's not a one-moment deal. Salvation is a durative thing. It's something that continues and continues to move forward. The Kerygmatic content of the gospel moves us from one location off to another location. And so, Wiley says, Wesley says that Christian witness is a public act of both faith and hope intended to awaken the world. It's belief and hope in salvation. Salvation not being that a person get a chit and go to heaven, but salvation being that a person would be saved, both their soul and their life. I want you to be sure you understand that, because there are some denominations that believe that salvation is just a soul-saving thing. The Methodist Church does not believe that. John did not believe that. John believed that what we needed to do was to save both of these. Some churches, as I said, the saving of the soul is the only thing that matters. I indicated this morning in my sermon that I became a member of a particular church for a period of time when I was 16 years old. And that particular church, the only thing that they cared about was saving the soul. And so every single week I heard sermons on different things, but the end of which was that everybody needed to get saved over and over. And the implication of that salvation was that we needed to get our chit so that we could stick it in our pocket so that when we died, we go to heaven. John didn't believe that that wasn't important. In other words, he did believe that that was important, but he did not believe that that's all there was to it. Nor did he think that the way that we got at that was simply by talking at people. He believed that there was something more to this. So the United Methodist Church we believe that that we are a part of a process of moving the mission of salvation forward, of offering life more abundantly. Jesus talked about that. He said, you know, he doesn't just offer salvation just to go to heaven. He says, I came to offer life and to offer it more abundantly. John said that there are no realms of human endeavor, economic, political, sexual, social, educational, to which the light of Christ is immune. That we're to be in all of these things. Wesley really expected to change the face of society in his life. Well, I want to ask you, do you really expect the church to change the world? Yes or no? Yes. Do I get a no? No. Do I get a yes? Do you expect the church to change the world? John actually did. He actually thought that believers in God will change the world by what they do. John set the tone for the United Methodist social movement. Now, I want to stop here for a second and ask you, what should the church be involved in? Huh? People's lives and communities, all right? What should the church be involved in? I wish Randy was here, because I think Randy would take a different tack. Being that Baptist, you know? Yeah. I wouldn't call him wrong for doing that. I would just say that he has a different kind of a viewpoint in that. What's the church supposed to be about? I have had people come up to me and say, Pastor, the church should never talk on politics. I find that interesting. And I said to one person one time, I said, well, do you know much about our church history? Do you know about a guy that started the church named John Wesley? No, but if John talked about it, he was wrong too. I said, okay, well, that's quite interesting. You know that the United Methodist Church was the beginning of some of the great movements inside of our country? How are you on drinking alcohol? Good at it. All right. Give me a good single malt and a cigar in the backyard with the sun, and I'm a happy guy. Yeah. Hey, give me a fishing pole and a beer. Right. I understand. Do you know what the United Methodist Church's stance on it is? Depressing? Disagree with it. All right. Yeah. It's interesting. Do you know who it was that was in the temperance movement? The big key people in that? Methodists. Methodists. Organizing labor. Wonder how you feel about that. You know that the Methodist Church, the Methodist people, were big on organizing labor. In London and then over in the United States later. Our church began about the same time that you had a huge uptick in manufacturing around the world. Huge. And in those days of early manufacturing, it was very unsafe for people. People were thought of like cows, like pieces of machinery by the businesses. And it was organized labor, and it was church movements and such. The Methodist Church pushing to get to where people and families. Do you know that kids worked in factories? Young kids worked in factories. And we were a part of, John Wesley and his movement was a part of getting some of that kicked off. My daddy worked when I was a boy, just a little baby, born in Gary, Indiana. Mom and Dad moved there, and that was Dad's first teaching job. Howard, go work in Gary, Indiana, in the 60s, in the 50s, you know. Wow, wow. Tough town, buddy. And Daddy not only was a teacher, he also worked over in the steel mill at night and in the summer. And one of his jobs was, there was a big giant hopper about a third of the size of this room, and it was filled with coal, and there was a hole down in the bottom, and they needed to get the hole to go down, the coal to go down that hole in the bottom. And so it would get clogged up every now and then, and someone would have to climb up the top and down inside the hopper and then kick that coal down in, and all you had was one of those big shovels, you know, with the handle on it. He said he got down in there and the coal started finally moving one time, and he was in pretty good shape. You know, he was a wrestler in college for West Virginia University. He said he barely got out of there. He said, if I'd have been 50 years old, I just simply would have dropped in with the coal. And they had people die there all the time. He said one of his jobs was to walk around on the tops of these things where big giant doors would swing open, and they would pull these ingots out of hot molten metal, and they had to put oil in the top of these drives. And he said as you'd walk along these catwalks, your shoes would start melting, and your boots, and it would become like standing on ice. And he said, I hated doing that. And I said, yeah, I think I can figure that out. I will guarantee you nobody does that today that way. But there was a day when OSHA, whatever you think of it, there was a day when the folks were not protected much. John Wesley was in the movement of trying to get some of that stuff done way back when, to get hours set. Eric talked about the company stores and such. You know, he said that, you know, the coal mines, that's a big deal. You know, I owe my Tennessee Ernie Ford. I'm hearing the song running through my head right now. I owe my soul to the company store. I load 16 tons, and what do I get? Another day older and deeper in debt. Jacob, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. You know, that thought process was really real, not only for coal miners, it was also real for lots of people in industry. John and the Wesley movement fought against some of that kind of stuff, getting working wages for people and such. Now, where do you think that put him with the elite in the United States and in London? Eating dinner with their no. And so when John came into town, or his boys came into town, boys in those days, because that's mainly what they were, you know, his men came into town and began to do this kind of stuff, organize things. It really irritated some folks, and folks said, what are you doing? You want to talk with people about salvation, that's one thing. You want to talk with them about this, it's a different deal. But John understood that witnessing was not just talking about the salvation of the soul, but rather it was the salvation of the entire process of the person lives in and the soul. And he actually believed that those things, what they did was to open doors for people to be able to talk about God. Some months ago, we talked about Jesus coming down off the Sermon on the Mount, and we talked about the different people that he bumped into. It's really very interesting to look at the individual folks that he bumped into. Person after person was, these individuals were a part of a people that would not have been a part of one of the people that a religious leader would speak with, but Jesus did. And in doing so, John believed that this opened a mandate for us to do the same kind of thing. That we needed to deal with the hardship of people. And just as Jesus used that as a method of being able to talk about things and be able to begin to witness to the faith that they had in God, that would open the ability for people to talk about God. Does that make sense? I want to stop here. Any questions about that? Any comments about that? Oh, I must be a great teacher. Or you've all gone to sleep, one of the two. John believed that those that were not using the power, influence, money responsibly for God's work were not only robbing God, but they also were robbing the poor, the hungry, the naked, and wronging widows. Now, that's an interesting thought. Eric, a couple weeks ago, said that when John died, he only had a couple suits. That's true. You know, John had very little left when he died. Some interesting stories about his life. I've read a lot of different ones that when he died, he only had a couple pieces of silver to eat off of, you know, knives and forks and stuff. Apparently, you were taxed by the amount of silver that you had in your house, was one of the ways that they calculated it. And so a tax guy came one day and wanted to look through, opened his doors and saw that he had a couple spoons, couple, you know, instruments to eat with. And he wanted to know where the rest of them were, and John said, "This is all I have." Now, why is it he only had that? Is it because he didn't make much money? Is it because he gave it away? How much money did John make a year? Oh, as an Anglican priest, he was paid okay. Wasn't great. That isn't where he got his money. John wrote books all the time and sold books. Now, this may shock you, but in today's money, John was making better than $500,000 a year. Is that money? Anybody here want to make $500,000 a year? Oh, yeah. In his day, he was making better than $500,000 a year. And yet when he dies, he has a couple forks, a couple suits, and that's it. Where'd the rest of it go? This guy drank the Kool-Aid by the gallons. He actually believed in what he preached. He didn't have anything left when he pulled out of here. He wrote books. He wrote medical books about homeopathic kind of things. Because in his day, people didn't have access to doctors and such unless you had money. So, you know, a lot of that homeopathic stuff actually works. I tell you that I'm part Native American. My wife says, "Yeah, you're about that much." But I mean, you know, Native Americans, they knew how to take sticks and twigs and mosses and bugs and, you know, fix things up. You know who did the first IV? You know when it was done? Anybody at all? I don't even know if I should tell you. It'd make you go look it up, except you won't. Hundreds of years ago. Native Americans. That's amazing. That's amazing. That's pre-tubing. That's, you know, that's utilizing natural. That's amazing. We think of these other cultures as being ignorant. Well, no, we think of them as being stupid and ignorant. And it's not at all true. John believed in helping other people, not because of an internal drive to help them from a humanitarian standpoint, but an internal drive of witnessing to the Spirit of God. I've irritated some folks in this congregation before by saying that the Feed Kempsville and these other things that we do is not about feeding people. It's about opening doors, and folks get really, really mad with me. Well, I just say, wah. Because it is. Our primary goal is not to feed people. Our primary goal is not to clothe people. Our primary goal is Our primary goal is to save people, and to save people means to introduce them to God and to other people. I got an email last night, or a text last night, from one of our buddies here in the church, and he was responding to an email from another guy, and he said, "Hey, Jeff, you know, what are your thoughts on this?" And so I went through the litany of that in the garden there were 4 sets of relationships that were destroyed. Our relationship self to self, self to others, self to God, self to creation. These 4 sets of relationships are messed up in the garden. And the inference on this email was that we needed to get straight with God, and when we got straight with God, then our relationship with everything else would be okay. And Jim knew that I wouldn't agree with that, and so he said, "What do you think?" Kiesler. And so I said, "Here you go, Jim." And so he walks up to me this morning. He said, "Thanks, appreciate it." And I said, "No worries, thanks for the opportunity." But John would say that our primary goal is not to be right with God. Our primary goal is to be right with God and others and creation. And that these things that we do enhance and move us in the direction of having the relationship with God primary, but not singular. Does that make sense at all? So the reason that we help other people, yes, it's because they need help. But more than that, it's out of response to the Spirit of God that has been placed inside of us. John, early in his ministry, began to organize groups, volunteer groups, to deal with sick people and to deal with people in jail, to go and care for them. Jails in John's day were significantly different than our day, the kind of care that people got in jails. And John spent a significant amount of time, visiting folks in jail. As I said, he gave free medicine to the poor. $500,000 a year buy a lot of medicine, wouldn't it? You imagine someone coming in and saying, "Here's $100,000. Would you help folks out?" Not just 10,000 or 20 or 30, but 100,000. I actually had that happen at my last church. A couple came in and said, "We've had a really good year, and we want to give the church," I think it was $120,000. "What do you want to do with it?" I said, "I want you to go away and give me a week to pray about this. Is what I want you to do." And then they came back and said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" And so then we took that 120 and we began to parcel it out in some places to really make some differences in a lot of people's lives. And we could have just thrown it in on the budget, but that didn't seem right, CT. I just had to figure out some way to figure out how to get that stuff out. That was John Wesley's way of thinking. As I said, he published a book on simple home remedies. He tried to make sure that people had access to quality medical assistance. He pushed for this. In a society when it wasn't caste system kind of driven, but it sort of was. Go back and take a look at the officers in the Revolutionary War. Go do some reading on the officers from Britain in the Revolutionary War and see who was what in the Revolutionary War. It was people who owned land, people who were rich. Those were the guys that were put in leadership. And if you were just a storefront kind of a guy and such, then you were a grunt soldier. The issues that John really pushed against. I want you to look at this list seriously. Poverty. What's usury? Usury. It's a word we don't use much today. How about I just give you this word, payday loan. Now you know what it is? Where you can go and sign your car over to them, and for 30, 40% a year, you can get a loan. What happens to somebody that doesn't have any money but has a small asset, and they put the small asset in so that they can get some money to pay some bills at 30%? I get phone calls like you do from people all the time, wanting me to buy this or that and I'm cruel. People call me and ask me for this and that, and I always have some smart comment for them. I should say just thank you and hang up, but I can't. You know, CT, I got to take a stick and poke them, man. You know? So, and this one guy called me one time and he said, hey, we've got a credit card for you that we want to send you with $5,000. Anybody get these? Of course you do. I said to the guy, I said, well, you know, I really appreciate it. I'd love to have it, but I'm not going to need it. What do you mean you're not going to need it? I said, well, I'm going to prison on Monday. What are you going to prison for? Beating my wife. The judge got, you know, stealing that thing from B.B. King. It's a lot cheaper if you don't beat her, you know, that song that he does. But anyway, yeah, I said, yeah, you know, and I'm going to prison for 5 years for beating my wife and his boyfriend and her boyfriend. And the guy said, well, you know, you go to prison, you're going to need money. You got the commissary. I said, but I'm not going to have any way to pay you. He said, who cares? Just get the credit card. And, you know, I just died laughing. But there are people who will set people up, and then they'll have no way to get out from underneath of that. That's usury. And it was a huge thing in Jesus' day. Frankly, it's a huge thing today. People come and talk to me about things that the church should be against. And invariably, these things that they want me to be against seem to be a whole lot less than other things. And usury is one of those things. I think if we want to start, you know, really kicking against stuff, why don't we kick against the things that are hurting people the most? I remember years ago, I was in my first pastorate over in Phoebus, and they wanted to pass the ability to do a lottery in Virginia. And I was vehemently opposed to it. Still am vehemently opposed to it. If you play the lottery, you know, I really don't care. CT, you play the lottery, I don't care, man, because you got a house, you got cars, you got a great truck, a 1951, man, beautiful truck. You know, my presumption is you could sell the truck if you really got into trouble with your dad or something. No, she says no, but it's her truck. Yeah, you could sell her truck if you got into trouble. You know, that tent in the backyard will be great, buddy. I promise. But you know, I remember going and standing at the polls, passing out things, trying to get people to vote against this because I was in Phoebus, little Chicago. And I knew the impoverished people that were around me, you know, the folks that I dealt with on a regular basis that were on my doorstep wanting food. I did what you do, Terry, over there. And it was at that point I said, I don't ever want to do this again because it just really just tore my heart out. And, you know, it just hurt me to see people hurting day after day after day after day after day. And I knew what was going to happen. If that got passed, then these people who didn't have anything were going to be investing what they didn't have trying to get something. And so I stood at the poll passing out things trying to get the Virginia lottery not to come into the United States, which several people inside my congregation were really irritated about because the pastor should never do that kind of stuff. At which point I thought, well, you don't know John Wesley, you don't know the church. I had a senator come up to me and grab me by my collars and start twisting them and said, little preacher, you need to go back to your church and you need to just get your, no. Do you ever see something flash through your mind? I saw the picture of the newspaper from Hampton with a big giant caption that said, new pastor of Phoebus United Methodist Church, decks Virginia senator. And I thought, well, I can't hit him. But I really just wanted to just take him under the chin and drop him on the ground for touching me. You know? And I was worried about what was going to happen. And I heard all the stuff, and they said, you know, okay, we won't do any kind of ads that are nothing except just telling people about. Well, that's not true anymore. I knew it wouldn't be true. I knew there'd be a matter of time until the ads were actually trying to entice people to play. And now what do we have coming? We now have you seen the stuff on TV where you can take your cell phone and vote on, you know, and get on, and we'll even give you $1,000, you know, and I'm... It breaks my heart because I don't anticipate that you're going to lose your house over this. you know? I don't think you are. I don't think you are. But what I do know is that we'll be hurting people, and the only way that they can see to possibly get out of being hurting is to take a swing at something that they shouldn't take a swing at. There become people that get addicted to it. They win, and in fact, that's quite frankly why they're doing, anyway, I don't want to get into it, but one of the people at that church went out and bought 100 lottery tickets and put them in the plate. And I happened to be there when they were counting the money. And that weekend, and Mel, who's no longer with us, Mel said, Lord, what are we going to do with these lottery tickets? And my old treasurer said, we're going to scratch them, and if we win, we're going to go get the money and put it in the plate. That's what we're going to do. Oh, my God. Hilarious. Poverty, usury, company control. He was big on collective bargaining, medicine, Medicare. He didn't like drinking. He didn't like fighting. He didn't like cursing. He didn't like slavery. Why did it start getting hot in here all of a sudden? But it is, isn't it? Okay. What was salvation for John Wesley? Salvation was more than just going to heaven. It incorporated salvation of life and soul. If this was so for John, it would seem that we should be able to go back and find where it came from, and it came from Jesus. Yes. As far as I'm concerned, you can. Anybody else warm? Man, it just all of a sudden went from 0 to 60. So what should Christians be witnessing to and like? How should Christians be witnessing to the work of the Spirit in their lives? How should you be witnessing to the work of Spirit in your lives? How should we corporately and individually be fulfilling the roles as true United Methodist Methodists? Let me say to you that a big thing that I would love for you to get is that corporate and individual. I talked about this in the sermon at the early service. I'm going to talk about it in the second service. Individual and corporate. You need to have an individual relationship with God, and you need to have a corporate relationship with an entity that has a relationship with God. These are the two things. You need to have your individual piety, your own, and you need to also be reaching out to people and to helping them to move forward into raising society. This is Wesley. This is Wesley. Individual, corporate, married, always. Theologically. You follow me? So the question I ask is, what is God calling you to actively be involved in order to bring the kingdom to the earth and bringing salvation to yourself and bringing salvation to others, both a spiritual salvation and a salvation of life and limb? The question that I would ask yourself, I do this every year during my birthday, can others see a difference in my life? Can others see a difference in my life? Has this past 12 months brought a difference in me so that other people can see it? Can others see a difference in our community because of our existence? I don't think there's anybody that knows this community at all that doesn't know that this church makes a huge difference in the life of the community. The feeding, the caring for people, the United Methodist Men. CT, what do we have, about 25 things, 20 things that we give to? Yeah, I'm looking at that list. Yeah, 2 sides of a piece of paper. United Methodist Women, a lot. Other groups, even Sunday school classes, care about things and do things for folks. So This week, what I would love for you to do is to think about that. And I would say to you, witness, witness, witness. Make witness a part of your life, your finances. I want to be clear about this because I made a mistake one time at telling people that they needed to tithe and they needed to give to the church and they needed to care about other people as much as themselves. And I had one individual and family one time change their giving completely. Boom. And then about 3 months later, they disappeared, and I didn't see them. And I finally caught up with them 3 or 4 months later, and I said, what the heck's going on? Because they were real faithful people. And he said to me, well, we're in trouble. I said, what do you mean you're in trouble? He said, well, we're about to lose the house and the car. I said, what do you mean you're about to lose the house and the car? He said, well, we heard you say that you need to give to the church, so we started giving 10% to the church. I said, okay. He said, well, we couldn't make the house payment, the car payments, and so now we're in trouble. I said, for God's sake, you can't go from 0 to 60. And so I said, okay, if I ever talk about giving again, I'm going to be sure that I tell you, do not get yourself in trouble. You've obligated yourself to a certain level. If you need to de-obligate yourself over time so that you can increase your giving, beautiful. But do not get yourself to where you lose your house, your car, your this, your that. Do not start shoving stuff on the credit card just to be able to do what it is that God's calling you to do. But make adjustments to your life over time so that you can give more and more to God. John Wesley said, my terminology, not his, earn all you can so you can save all you can so you can give away all you can. What he said is earn all you can, spend as little as you can. Save, spend, same kind of thing. Marginal propensity to save in America up until COVID was hideous. Hideous. It's actually increased significantly because of COVID. But now that COVID's coming back down, I will guarantee you that the marginal propensity to save in the United States will again begin to plummet. The amount of stuff that we have on credit cards and those kind of things. Elizabeth and I owned a 5,000 square foot home that we bought for $600,000 in Loudoun County. It went to over $1 million. God told me to sell it. I told him to shut up. And so then it dropped down to way below that, and I had to sell the thing for less than I actually paid for it 13 years later. Well, I never wanted to live in a 5,000 square foot house. I wanted to be able to make money on the 5,000 square foot house to be able to send my kids to college and that kind of thing. I learned a lesson there, one that was really tough. I lost over $1 million. But when you do things in life, you know, I think really John had a better way. I told you that at some point I want to move to Michigan, and I've been trying to find a place in Michigan that I want to buy. And I'm looking for a 2-bedroom place, you know, that's small, that doesn't cost much to heat, doesn't cost much to care for, these kind of things. Because we don't need a 2,400 square foot, a 3,600 square foot. God knows we don't need a 5,000 square foot with 3 acres. Some people need that. Great, go have it. Have fun with it. I don't need it, don't want it. I'd like to have more money to be able to spend changing people's lives, sort of like John did. I get closer to the end of my life, and I probably will dump some of my bank accounts and stuff if I have an opportunity into other things as I get there. I believe in changing people's lives. I believe in offering them salvation, a relationship with Jesus Christ, but also with other people, and called corporately as a body of the church to make a difference in the community and life of people. Amen? Anything you want to ask me or questions? Yeah, we really need to think about how we're living, what we're doing, so that we can be who it is that God is calling us to be. If we just sort of walk through the world aimlessly, we're not being Methodist. We're not being what John's calling us to be. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, let us pray. Lord, bless Eric. He's going to be leading worship in about 30 minutes. Help him to do a great job and to enjoy himself. Bless him for this coming week. He can come back and finish up. And thanks, Lord, for all that you do for us. Help us to be great witnesses this week, individually and corporately. In your holy name we pray. Amen. Have a great week, guys.